Are you a fan of curved swords? And have you ever wanted a Shamshir that you can fence with? Well, let's check out the VB Shamshir and see how it is. Hi, I'm Nick Thomas and welcome back to the Academy of Historical Fencing, and today I'm going to be giving you a full breakdown review of the VB or Victor Berberkut's Shamshir that is designed for fencing, or HEMA if you like, and that might sound a little bit strange to some of you because this is a Shamshir. The Shamshir is the quintessential Persian sword, so around Iran, although ultimately they spread far and wide throughout the Middle East, parts of Asia. It was the kind of generic sword or generic sabre in use in those areas, although of course they had other sword designs, but the Shamshir is absolutely iconic and it's spread through various parts. And so you say, well, it's not a European sword, aren't you a HEMA instructor? Well, yes, the AHF, we practice historical European martial arts, but you notice in our name it's historical fencing, so yeah, we teach European weapons, but we're happy for people to bring in weapons and styles from elsewhere in the world, and we often do, and many of us actually do like weapons and styles from other parts of the world, and we're happy to bring them into sparring. So that's absolutely fine. It's a HEMA appropriate trainer rather than necessarily being a HEMA sword. And yet, it is also a HEMA sword as well, and that is because the Shamshir gained popularity in Europe, particularly after the campaign in Egypt with the French and British officers. And as a result, around that sort of start of the 19th century, these kind of swords started to become popular in Europe. So technically it is also HEMA as well. It's an import, if you like. Such as this, for example, which is a British officer's sword, basically a very high-ranking, probably a high-ranking cavalry officer or a general staff officer. And in fact, this became the standard pattern for generals soon after this was made and is still current today. And also, the blade form of Shamshirs influenced many officers' swords, even though they kept sort of British hilts on some of them. They influenced the blades as well as some hilts. Now, this is an antique Shamshir, and it is just an iconic weapon. They aren't always quite as curved as this. They varied quite a bit. As ever, if you said, you know, what is a European sabre like? Well, quite varied depending on the culture and time period. Now, Shamshirs do follow a more typical form, but you'll still find plenty of variety in terms of length, weight, curvature, and even some hilt features, for example. So let's get back to the VB model. And the question is, well, there are many questions, of course, is how well does it represent a Shamshir? How useful is it in your HEMA training? How well does it work with other HEMA swords? You know, does it work with your gloves? All of these questions, all the usual stuff that you want to know. So VB, or Victor Berberkut's, my personal experience of VB products is kind of, I would say, middling. Is they have improved over time. I've used them off and on for 10 or 12 years or something like that. And I found them to be sometimes a little bit crude, particularly in handling characteristics. Durability has improved over the years, and they're okay products. They're sort of solid, but they don't always inspire me. They don't always feel especially lively. So, you know, that's my kind of starting point. However, VB offers quite a wide range of products. They're quite easy to get. The prices are often quite good, and he often offers models that other people don't. So, for example, a Shamshir that is, you know, HEMA appropriate for sparring is really quite unusual. So in terms of specification, the website says that this is 910 grams, which is pretty hefty for a simple hilted, fairly short blade. Mine actually came out at 855 grams. The website says the balance is 14 and mine is 13 on an 80 centimeter blade. And that would suggest that my one has maybe been ground off a little bit more than the typical. So that's probably a good thing because it's brought the weight down a little bit. So maybe you'll get others that are a little bit heavier. And personally, I've never actually handled another example exactly like this of the VB Shamshir, so I can't tell you what the range is like. I can only tell you what my personal one is like. So I've had this for 2 years. I've got a reasonable amount of use out of it. I don't use it massively, but it's kind of a useful thing to have in the bag, particularly as it doesn't take up much room because it's, you know, it sits flat. And it's kind of useful, it fits all gloves, so it's sort of a useful trainer. Now, I've already given you the specification. Let's talk a bit more about the blade itself. It's been cut from quite a narrow piece of stock. I think the website says 4.5 mil. I think mine might be narrower than that actually. It looks more like 3 mil. It's pretty narrow, and that can sometimes make blades wobbly, or at least not give them curvature or curvature in the thrust, or flex if you like, towards the tip where you'd want it, and it gives it an even plane, which is what it has done here. So it flexes more in its sort of overall length, and that can usually result in either stiff blades or very, very flexible ones. And in this case, it's gone stiff, okay? It's in the range, I would say, of like a medium to strong Regenier feather, for example. It is on the stiff range. It is rolled tip, nice big strong safe rolled tip. That actually is very, very good. And the edges, well, it tapers down to about 1 to 1.5 mil maybe towards the foible. And the edges have taken some notable damage without being awful. I would say that's equivalent to maybe like a Regenier Mezzo, or maybe a little bit better than that because they are a bit soft. It's okay on the durability's sake. It's not fantastic, but it's okay. It hasn't been horrific, and I haven't done edge maintenance. You know, a lot of black fences often obviously have been like this on the edges as well. It's sort of, the edge is solid enough. And then we come back to the hilt. You'll see that the leather has started to decay, and I've heard from other people that have got these swords that the leather has died quite quickly and basically come apart. So the leather doesn't seem to be the most durable. Now, in terms of the fit and finish, so the blade's fine. The guard, I think the guard is actually nicely done. It's very strong. Obviously, the langets here do bend. That's kind of very typical when you have pronounced langets. They do tend to bend, but it's mild steel. You can bend it back. It's not a big deal. And then you've got this pommel cap, which is very large and quite heavy. But you can also see that it doesn't actually sit straight. And I've heard a lot about similar experiences with fit and finish on these, where things don't necessarily align perfectly. So yeah, it is a little bit wonky on the pommel there. Now onto the grip. Historically speaking, Shamshirs were really compact, a bit like tulwars, to the level that your bare hand would be crammed in there with no space at all. And of course, that's no good to us in HEMA. We need an actual, amount of glove or hand protection. And so it's been made larger. As a result, I can fit all of my heavy gloves in this, including mittens, which can sometimes be necessary with such an open hilt. And so that's absolutely fine. And the good thing about that is that I can throw this to anyone, no matter how bulky their gloves are, and they can just use it. So that's kind of quite useful. So there's the kind of breakdown of the specs of the sword. Now, what do I think about that compared to antiques, compared to training swords? It's okay. So historically speaking, Shamshirs, their hilts tend to be quite light, but this guard is quite beefy, and that pommel cap is also quite beefy. So this has come out relatively hilt heavy for this kind of sword, and that balance point of 13. I've often handled Shamshirs that are in 16, 17 centimeter balances because the hilts are so light. So this has brought it back, and of course it's also brought up the total weight. Now there are Shamshirs that were that heavy, but it is in the higher range certainly. But yeah, it's brought the balance back. It doesn't feel too bad. The rigidity is definitely a factor. This is in the stiff category, and it's something to consider. The way I think about this sword is it's very much like a lot of arm-in swords that we see in HEMA, rather than a lot of sabres. And that goes from like hitting power, but especially rigidity and hand protection issues. So you need to be using, beefy, heavy gloves on it. You need to be considering the fact that it is not incredibly flexible. But, aside from that, it works okay. So yeah, you could use this for a sabre. A Shamshir is a kind of sabre ultimately. Or you could, of course, use it with things like sword and buckler, because these kind of swords were very commonly used with bucklers and shields and that kind of thing. And in many ways, this is kind of the arm-in sword of Persia. Now you look at it, and if that pommel was symmetrical, it would look basically like a medieval arm-in sword. So yeah, okay, it's got some curve to it, but it would be very, very similar to many sort of medieval and early Renaissance arm-in swords in so many ways, aside from that curvature. So you could use it as a sword and buckler sword, you could use it as a sabre, or of course, if you're into Persian martial arts, you could use it for that. So in terms of 2 years, now obviously I'm not using this super often, so it's not like it's getting a massive beat in. In that time, yeah, the grip is deteriorating quicker than I would like, and the edge damage I think is okay. What are the good points about this sword and what are the bad ones? Well, it is overall pretty durable. It is accessible because even though the website always says out of stock on his products, you can basically order them. It just means he literally doesn't have them in stock. It doesn't mean they can't be ordered. And every order we've had from VB has actually been pretty quick, within something like 3 months or so, maybe 4 months of ordering. So you can order them and get them fairly easily, which is quite nice. And Shamshirs are not exactly something which we see much in the HEMA world. And it doesn't have to represent just a Shamshir, because this kind of overall form, it's also just kind of generic early period sabre that actually a lot of cultures used something similar. So it can actually represent a lot of different things. Now the price, I bought this 2 years ago and they were a little bit cheaper back then. It's now 330 euros. I think that's excessive for what it is, because ultimately this is a flat blade with, there's no fuller, there's no significant shaping to the blade itself. It's thin stock. The hilt components are quite basic. It is expensive for what it is, especially considering the grip doesn't last so well, and the edges are just okay. So I would say it's a kind of an imperfect product that sort of does the job. The downside to that is it has to compete with the live-in history market Shamshir that I got in about a year ago. Now, this, like the VB Shamshir, is also an imperfect product, but it's half the price. And of course, you can let a lot more go when it's half the price. I will do a separate review on this sword soon, but it's fair to say that it shares many similar pros and cons of the VB, although it's half the price, so you can be far more forgiving then, of course. But I'll put that other sword aside and just get back to the VB Shamshir. So overall, what do I think about it? It's quite a fun sword to have in the bag, as long as you remember about that rigidity and take that into account. It's kind of fun to use in sword and buckler, it's fun to use with paired swords. You can use it just, as in a kind of early period saber. It's kind of useful to have and it's kind of fun, but the price, particularly since it's gone up, is quite hefty for such a simplistic product. And the fit and finish, the durability of the grip are kind of off-putting. So my overall opinion of this is kind of mixed, and that's been my experience with a lot of VB stuff. It's very middling. There's sort of pros and cons. They're not always the slickest in handling, well, very rarely, and it's just So there you have it. I'd love to say it was more positive. It's not all negative. It absolutely has its place. I regularly still bring it to training and do stuff with it, but it has some issues. Realistically, this sword, to make it better, it needs leather that is more durable than this. Considering it doesn't get a huge amount of use, that is falling apart way too quickly. The fit and finish needs to be better. I mean, this needs to actually be straight. The quality control there is not great. The edge wear, I think, is acceptable, but the rigidity is a problem. I don't mind certain swords being particularly rigid, particularly very short swords, but at this size, it can do a lot better. An 80 centimeter blade can easily be made to flex a lot more than that. That is a very rigid blade. I'd like to see a little bit less hilt weight, a little better fit and finish, a little bit more flex, and maybe then the price would be justified if the improvements would be made. But as it stands, with this kind of quality and these features, it is, I would say, overpriced. It's also worth mentioning that 80 centimeters is pretty long for a Shamshir. Now, of course, like all sword types, there were variety, but a typical Shamshirs were a bit shorter than that, and that's where the live-in history market one, I think, fits the category of sword a little bit better. So, VB Shamshir, do I recommend it? I think it's a little bit overpriced, and I think it has some issues. If you can overcome them, then it's still a useful product. It's fun to use, as long as you mind the rigidity of it. And that's it. So yeah, I think there's definitely there's room for some improvement here, but it's nice to see that Shamshirs are available for the HEMA market, and people that want to do other martial arts in this sort of HEMA sphere, kind of cool to have it. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I will also do a review on the live-in history market one soon. If you haven't subscribed, please do so.